Flying along today, we find ourselves in Chapter 6, Section 2, and we're going to be talking about the progressive presidents. In the first section, we introduce what progressivism is and how we interact with the government in that point in time. Here we're going to look at the people that were the key characters and what did they do to change what would happen. First thing to think about is in 1901, Republican President William McKinley is going to be assassinated. Vice President at the time, Theodore Roosevelt, is going to be sworn in as president through the succession lines. Roosevelt was a different kind of president because he thought that the government ought to take responsibility for the welfare of people. He said it is the duty of the president to act upon the theory that he is the steward of the people and to assume that he has the legal right to do whatever the need of the people demand, unless the Constitution or the laws explicitly forbid him to do it, meaning that the president should do everything to make the people happy or to make them okay, as long as it doesn't violate the Constitution, which is the supreme law of the land, or any laws that are on the books. He used what they call the bully pulpit in order to share his ideas or what he thought most likely should be happening. In 1902, he negotiated the Square Deal, which is going to become the striking the anthracite coal miners management. He struck a deal between the two. In 1902, the miners demanded higher pay on an 8-hour workday. The coal mine strike lasted about 11 months and threatened the nation as the winter approached. Unlike the Gilded Age's presidents, Roosevelt did not side with the owners and break up the strike. He forced both sides to arbitrate or face government seizure of the coal time. When we talked about the whole vocabulary term arbitrate, that means to have an outside person come in and negotiate for you. The result was a square deal for labor, which meant higher wages, and for owners, which meant no formal recognition of the union. Throughout the Gilded Age, laissez-faire policies by the national government led to powerful monopolies and unfair working conditions for laborers. Congress created the Interstate Commerce Commission, the ICC, in 1886 to regulate the railroads. And then they passed the Sherman Antitrust Act in 1890 to regulate the companies that restricted trade. But neither would be used to control monopolies during the Gilded Age. On the right side is a really good image, a political cartoon. Shows the small vessel of competition losing against the big vessel of monopoly. Because it was really hard to figure out ways to break or stop this process or the progress of these gigantic corporations. Roosevelt was the first president to regulate big business and break up those corporate monopolies. He became known as a trust buster, and when he used the Anti-Sherman Antitrust Act to break up the Northern Securities Company in 1902. Again, a couple great examples of political cartoons showing Roosevelt fighting against the corporations on the side of Americans, even though he was a much smaller man compared to these gigantic industries. Roosevelt busted 25 other corporate monopolies during his presidency, but he also saw the benefit of efficient monopolies and wanted to make sure he can control those bad different trusts. Upton Sinclair is going to write a book called The Jungle in 1906. President Roosevelt's going to pressure Congress to create consumer safety laws. To talk about that was the meat scandal that we discussed in the earlier section about how the meat industry was unregulated, and Congress needed to step in. And this is a period of time where we look at why do we have safety regulations on the food that we eat, the pills that we take, the drinks that we consume. Congress passed the Pure Food and Drug Act in 1906 to ban harmful products and end false medical claims. Here's a couple of good examples I found here online. Nerve and brain tablets for the treatment and cure of men's special diseases and all disturbances of the entire nervous system. Here you had a good example of Stinkany and Pores, Paregoric, which was a drug. If you were only 5 days old, you took 5 drops. 2 weeks old, 8 drops. 5 years old, 25 drops. If you were an adult, a teaspoon. Of course, you look at what the number one thing is over here, the ingredients: 46% alcohol, 1 3/10 gram of opium. Okay, so again, this isn't going to be doing what it necessarily we think it's going to be doing. And then finally, my favorite was the cocaine toothache drops. Instantaneous cures, price of 15 cents. Again, a lot of these things that we now know are harmful to us, we were being advertised, and we were kind of getting folded into the idea that these things were going to help us, make us better. In reality, they were just kind of placebos in some cases, or things that got you so high or out of it that you weren't able to make good decisions. Another example here shows you the butter, sweet scented farm creamery butter, and on the left side it shows you what goes into all that, the soap, including chlorinating compound and arsenic, everything that was coming out there that was not necessarily what we thought it was going to be. So during the Gilded Age, corporations clear-cut forests and exploited America's natural resources. Roosevelt began in his first national environmental conservation program. The government protected 195 million acres of land as national parks or national forests. You can see again, to those areas were going to be so that we could keep for generations the beauty and the ability for us to see. You think about up here locally, Allegheny National Forest, which is about an hour away from us north. The Reclamation Service placed natural resources such as oil, trees, and coal under federal protection, meaning that we needed to see some of our natural landscape. We needed to protect these things for future generations so that they can enjoy them, or they could benefit from scientific revolution or scientific discovery to make things better for all people. The 3 C's of Mr. Roosevelt were consumer protection, control of corporations, and conservation. Those are very important to look at when we're talking about the accomplishments of Mr. Roosevelt. In 1908, he decided not to run for a third term. His presidency was from 1901 to 1909, and it changed the United States. For the first time, the government assumed responsibility for the welfare of all citizens, regulated big businesses, and protected the environment. His forest policy helped increase American influence in the world and led to the construction of the Panama Canal. So when Theodore Roosevelt decided he didn't want to run for his third term in 1908, he helped William Howard Taft win the presidency to continue this progressive agenda. Again, another Republican. The left side is a really good political cartoon showing Taft as kind of the chosen soul. The king is passing down the crown. Even though Roosevelt, most polls would indicate at that time he was popular enough to win another election quite easily. At this time, they're going to put Taft into the presidency, and he's going to help him to win. One thing that you always hear about is when you look at Mr. Taft's demeanor, President Taft's demeanor, he is the biggest person who ever win for president, and the largest in weight. Most sites and sources say he was around 355 pounds, so he was a very large man. There are lots of stories and rumors that he got stuck in the bathtub at the White House. That is obviously not necessarily the case, but what they did have to do was they had to install larger bathtubs in all places where he would reside, including the presidential yacht and boat. And eventually when he retired, he famously does flood a floor at the hotel when his bath does overflow, but he does not get stuck in the bathtub against popular belief.